In a city where churches had become corporations and pastors had become millionaire businessmen, there existed a temple that surpassed all others in magnificence and ostentation. It was called Church of the Kingdom of Eternal Prosperity, and its name alone already declared its philosophy. Prosperity as synonymous with divine blessing. The building was a masterpiece of modern architecture mixed with elements that pretended to be biblical. It had seating capacity for 15,000 people, giant LED screens covering the side walls, and a lighting system so complex it required a team of 10 technicians to operate. The exterior facade was decorated with marble columns that imitated Solomon's temple, and at the entrance stood a 3-meter-high bronze statue representing an angel holding a cornucopia overflowing with gold coins. The lead pastor, Maximilian Ferrer, was a man who had built his religious empire on the premise that poverty was a sin, and wealth was evidence of divine favor. He was 51 years old, but invested small fortunes in staying young. Plastic surgeries, stem cell treatments, anti-aging therapies that only the ultra-rich could afford. His hair was platinum blonde, combed back with products imported from France. His teeth were so white and perfect, they seemed to glow with their own light. And his tan was perfect, the result of weekly sessions in state-of-the-art tanning beds. Maximilian didn't wear suits. He wore declarations of power. Each outfit was specifically designed for him by European fashion houses. His suits cost between $25,000 and $30,000 each. His shirts were hand-embroidered Italian silk. His cufflinks were white gold with embedded diamonds. And his shoes, always impeccable, were custom-made works of art that cost $5,000 a pair. But his most ostentatious accessories were his watches. He had a collection of over 20 luxury watches, each valued at no less than $200,000. He alternated between a Patek Philippe Grand Complications, an Audemars Piguet Royal Oak Offshore, a Richard Mille RM5602 Sapphire, and several more. On his fingers he wore solid gold rings with precious stones, and around his neck a thick gold chain from which hung a diamond crucifix the size of a hand. He drove a fleet of luxury vehicles, a Rolls-Royce Phantom for special occasions, a Lamborghini Aventador to relax, a Bentley Continental for daily use, and an armored Mercedes Maybach for security. And he lived in a 10,000 square meter mansion in the city's most exclusive neighborhood, with an Olympic pool, tennis court, private helipad, and a service staff of 15 people. All of this, according to him, was evidence that God blesses those who have true faith and sow generously in His kingdom. The church had a very particular system for offerings. It wasn't simply passing a basket. No, they had supernatural sowing moments, where members were called to the front according to the amount they would give. First they called the gold sowers, those who gave $10,000 or more. These came to the front with their envelopes, delivered them personally to the pastor on stage, received a special prayer with laying on of hands, and their names were projected on the giant screens for the entire congregation to applaud. Then came the silver sowers, those who gave between $5,000 and $10,000. They also received personal prayer, though briefer, and their names appeared on the screens. After that, the bronze sowers between $1,000 and $5,000. These received a collective prayer from the stage. And finally, regular offerings, any amount less than $1,000. These simply deposited their envelopes in boxes strategically placed at the exits, without recognition, without special prayer, without even being mentioned. One Sunday afternoon, during the 5 o'clock service, the church was packed as always. Thousands of people filled every seat, every available aisle. The industrial air conditioning struggled to maintain a comfortable temperature against the heat of so many bodies together. Among all that crowd, there was a man who stood out for his simplicity amid so much opulence. His name was Fernando. He was 38 years old, but worry lines on his face made him look older. He wore worn but clean jeans, a simple white shirt that had been washed so many times the collar was frayed, and old synthetic leather shoes he had mended himself with glue. Fernando worked as a food delivery person on a bicycle. He didn't have a car, didn't have savings, lived in a rented room in an old building across town. But there was something he did have, a daughter, a beautiful 7-year-old girl named Lucia, who was the center of his universe. Lucia had been born with a congenital heart condition that required corrective surgery. The operation cost $60,000. Fernando had spent the last 5 years working 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, saving every penny he could. He had sold everything he had of value, his late wife's inherited jewelry, his old motorcycle, even his television and cell phone, keeping only a basic phone to receive food orders. And finally, after 5 years of unimaginable sacrifice, he had done it. He had the full $60,000. He had kept it in his bank account, and Lucia's surgery was scheduled for 2 weeks later. But Fernando was a man of faith, and he sincerely believed he should thank God for allowing him to gather that money. So he decided to do something that to many would seem crazy: give an offering of 10% of those $60,000. $6,000. It was an enormous amount for him. It meant that after the surgery he wouldn't have money for post-operative medications, wouldn't have money for medical follow-up, wouldn't have a safety cushion in case of complications. But he believed, with sincere faith, that God would provide. He withdrew the $6,000 in cash from the bank that same morning. He counted them carefully, put them in a common white envelope, and wrote in his own handwriting on the outside, "Offering of gratitude for my daughter Lucia's healing." He arrived at the church 2 hours before the service because he wanted to pray, wanted to prepare his heart, wanted to make sure he was doing this for the right reasons. He sat in the back rows, closed his eyes, and prayed like he had never prayed before. God, this money represents 5 years of my life. Every bill here is a day I didn't see my daughter because I was working. It's a birthday I missed. It's a night I slept only 3 hours to be able to make more deliveries. But I give it to you with joy because I believe you take care of us. I ask you to bless this offering, not for me, but so it can be a blessing to others. And I ask you to protect my Lucia in her surgery. That's all I need. When the service began, Fernando observed the spectacle with a mixture of awe and discomfort. The lights, the deafening music, the promotional videos about new church projects, including a private jet to take the gospel faster to all nations. Everything seemed excessive to him, but he reminded himself he wasn't there to judge. He was there to give his offering of gratitude. Pastor Maximilian appeared on stage with his characteristic entrance. Strobe lights, epic music, a cloud of artificial smoke. He wore a white suit with interwoven gold threads that sparkled under the lights. He looked more like a rock star than a spiritual leader. He preached for 45 minutes about the law of sowing and reaping, citing biblical verses out of context to support his doctrine that the more money you give to the church, the more money God will return to you. He used examples of members who had sowed 1,000 and received 100,000, though he never mentioned that these members owned successful businesses that had nothing to do with their offerings. Finally came the supernatural sowing moment. "It's time to sow, family," shouted the pastor with rehearsed enthusiasm. "It's time to demonstrate your faith. Remember, God loves a cheerful giver, but he also loves a generous giver. And generosity is measured in numbers, brothers and sisters. Numbers don't lie. Your offering is the thermometer of your faith." They began calling the gold sowers. One by one, men and women dressed in expensive clothes went up on stage with thick envelopes. The pastor received them with effusive hugs, prayed for them individually, and their names appeared on the screens in golden letters while the congregation applauded. "Glory to God for Brother Rodriguez, who sowed $20,000. This man will be blessed 100 times over." Then came the silver sowers. More applause, more recognition, though slightly less enthusiastic. After that, the bronze sowers. Fernando, with his $6,000 envelope in hand, stood up. Technically, he was a silver sower according to the church's categories. His heart beat fast. He had never had so much money in his hands in his entire life, and he was about to hand it over. Comment which country you're watching this video from, because what happens next will break your heart. Fernando began walking toward the front. People looked at him as he passed. His humble appearance contrasted violently with the expensive suits and designer dresses of the other sowers. Some murmured. Others looked at him with curiosity mixed with disdain. When he reached the stage, one of the pastor's assistants stopped him. "One moment, brother. How much are you sowing?" $6,000. Fernando responded with a soft but clear voice. The assistant checked a tablet. 6,000. Okay, you're a silver sower. But the moment for silver sowers has already passed. You'll have to wait until the end for a collective prayer. But Fernando tried to explain that he had stood up on time, but it had taken him longer to reach the front from the back rows. "Those are the rules, brother. Please return to your seat." Fernando, disappointed but obedient, began to return. But Pastor Maximilian from the stage had noticed him, and something about Fernando's appearance caught his attention, not in a good way. "Wait, The pastor's voice boomed through the speakers. You, the one who's returning. Come here. Fernando turned around confused. The assistant signaled for him to come up on stage. With nervous steps, Fernando climbed the stairs. Thousands of eyes were on him. Cameras focused on him. His image appeared on the giant screens. He felt small, exposed, vulnerable. "What's your name?" asked the pastor, though his tone wasn't kind. It was more inquisitive, almost accusatory. "Fernando, pastor. Fernando. And tell me, Fernando, how much are you going to sow today?" $6,000, pastor." There was a murmur in the congregation. It was a respectable amount. It wasn't among the highest, but it definitely wasn't small. The pastor extended his hand. "Let me see that envelope." Fernando handed it to him. The pastor took it, weighed it in his hand, and his expression changed. It wasn't the thick, elegant envelope that the other sowers had brought. It was a common white envelope wrinkled at the corners with Fernando's handwriting on the front. "What is this?" asked the pastor with a tone of disgust. "You brought your offering in this cheap envelope." Fernando didn't understand. "It's an envelope, pastor. It has the money inside. I'm not just referring to the envelope. Look at how you're dressed. Look at your appearance. Do you really think you can come sow in God's house looking like that?" Fernando lowered his gaze, ashamed. This is my best outfit, pastor." The pastor opened the envelope and began counting the bills in front of everyone. He did it slowly, deliberately, as if inspecting something suspicious. The bills were of varied denominations. There were $100 bills, 50s, 20s. They were used, wrinkled, some even with small wear marks. When he finished counting, the pastor looked at Fernando with an expression mixing disbelief and contempt. $6,000, he said, and his voice dripped with disappointment. "You tell me you brought $6,000, but look at this." He raised the bills so the cameras would focus on them. "These bills are old, wrinkled, dirty. This is money that's passed through who knows how many hands. This is..." He paused dramatically. "This is shameful." The word echoed through the auditorium. Fernando felt as if he'd been slapped. His eyes filled with tears he struggled to contain. "Pastor, this money," interrupted the pastor with contempt, "isn't even presented appropriately. When you come to sow in God's house, you come with new bills, clean, in an appropriate envelope. This," he lifted the wrinkled white envelope, "this is disrespectful." "But pastor, that money I don't care what it represents to you." The pastor raised his voice. "What matters is how you present it before God. And this," he threw the envelope and bills back at Fernando with such force they fell to the stage floor scattering. "This is a shameful offering." Fernando immediately knelt to pick up the bills that had scattered. Tears now flowed freely down his face. His hands trembled as he tried to gather each bill. Some had fallen down the stage stairs. People in the front rows looked at them, but nobody moved to help him. "Your offering is shameful," repeated the pastor, and each word was a knife, not because of the amount, but because of how you present it. God deserves excellence, God deserves the best, and this, he pointed at Fernando kneeling picking up his bills. "This is not excellence." The congregation was silent. Some felt uncomfortable. Others nodded, agreeing with the pastor, and others recorded with their phones. "Leave," ordered the pastor. "Take your offering. When you're ready to sow with excellence, with new bills, in dignified presentation, then return. But until then, don't insult God with this. Fernando, with the bills clutched to his chest, came down from the stage staggering. He felt the stares, heard the murmurs. He walked down the central aisle with his head down, sobbing, humiliated in front of thousands of people. When he reached the exit, he collapsed against the wall. He cried like he hadn't cried since his wife died 5 years earlier. He cried from the humiliation. He cried from the injustice. He cried because he had wanted to do something good and beautiful and had been trampled. An older woman approached him. She was one of those who cleaned the church bathrooms. Her name was Rosa. "Son," she said with a soft voice, putting her hand on his shoulder, "don't cry. What that man said doesn't come from God." Fernando raised his tear-filled face. "But he's the pastor. He must know." "That man," Rosa interrupted gently, "is many things, but a true pastor he is not." "May I ask you something? Why did you want to give those $6,000? And Fernando told her the whole story. He told her about Lucia, about her heart condition, about the 5 years of hard work, about the $60,000 he had finally gathered, about his desire to thank God with an offering of 10%. "It was all I had for my daughter's surgery," he said between sobs. "Well, not all. I still have the 54,000 that's left. But these 6,000 represent 500 sleepless nights, represent thousands of kilometers on a bicycle under sun and rain, represent every sacrifice I've made." Rosa had tears in her eyes now. "Son, that money is sacred, not because of the amount, but because of what it represents. And that man who calls himself pastor just rejected one of the most beautiful sacrifices I've seen in my life. So what do I do? Keep it? Take it to another church?" Rosa thought for a moment. "I don't know what to do with the money, son, but I know this. God saw your heart. He saw your sacrifice. And he didn't reject it, though that man did. If this story is breaking your heart, give me a like and subscribe, because what comes next will leave you speechless." Fernando decided to go home. He put the $6,000 back in his pocket, but something had changed inside him. He no longer felt the desire to give that offering. Not to that church, not to that pastor. During the following days, Fernando couldn't get what had happened out of his mind. The humiliation burned in his chest every time he remembered it. But he also felt something else. Anger. Anger against that system that measured the value of offerings by their presentation instead of by the heart with which they were given. Lucia's surgery was approaching. Fernando used the $60,000 he had, including the $6,000 he had tried to give as an offering, to pay for the complete procedure. The surgery was successful. Lucia came through, but doctors warned she would need special medications for 6 months after the operation, medications that would cost $1,000 monthly. Fernando didn't have that money. He had used every last cent on the surgery. Now he would have to start from zero again, working double to be able to pay for his daughter's medications. But then, something extraordinary happened. 1 week after the incident at church, Fernando received a call from an unknown number. "Mr. Fernando?" asked a male voice on the other end. "Yes, it's me. My name is Javier Montoya. I'm a news producer for City News Channel. We've received a video of what happened to you at the Church of the Kingdom of Eternal Prosperity. The video has gone viral on social media. It's been viewed by over 5 million people in the last 24 hours. Fernando froze. "What video?" "Of the pastor rejecting your offering and calling it shameful. Someone recorded it and uploaded it to the internet, and public reaction has been massive. People are outraged. We'd like to interview you if you're willing. We want you to tell your complete story." Fernando hesitated. He didn't want more attention. He didn't want to be seen as a victim, but he thought about Lucia. He thought about the medication she needed, and he thought about all the other people who had probably been humiliated similarly, but who had no voice. "Okay," he finally said. "I'll tell my story." The interview aired 2 days later in prime time. Fernando told everything. Lucia's condition, the 5 years of work, the $60,000, his desire to give 10% as an offering of gratitude, the public humiliation he suffered. The journalist asked him, "Why did you want to give $6,000 knowing you wouldn't have money afterward for post-operative medications?" Fernando answered honestly, "Because I believed God had been good to me in allowing me to gather that money. I wanted to honor him. I wanted to give thanks. I didn't do it out of obligation. I did it from genuine gratitude. And I thought if I gave with faith, God would provide for the rest. And now? Do you still believe that?" Fernando was silent for a moment. "Yes, I still believe it. But now I understand that God doesn't live in luxurious buildings. He's not impressed with expensive envelopes or new bills. I believe God sees the heart, and my heart was pure when I tried to give that offering." The interview touched millions of hearts. Social media exploded. Hashtags like "my shameful offering," "my justice for Fernando," and "hypocrite pastor" became worldwide trends. But the most shocking thing was the response from ordinary people. A woman in the neighboring city saw the interview and organized a collection among her neighbors. She gathered $2,000 and sent them to Fernando with a note, "For Lucia's medications." A group of university students did a GoFundMe campaign. They set a goal of $10,000 to help with Lucia's medical expenses. In 24 hours, they had raised $65,000. A pharmacist who saw the interview contacted Fernando and offered to supply all of Lucia's medications free of charge for a year. A businessman who owned a chain of restaurants offered Fernando a job as logistics manager, with a salary 3 times what he earned as a delivery person. Blessings came from unexpected places, not from the multi-million-dollar church with its ostentatious pastor, but from ordinary, common people who saw a father trying to do the right thing and decided to help. Fernando was overwhelmed. "I don't understand," he told a reporter. "Why are all these people helping me? They don't know me. I don't owe them anything." "Because your story reminded them of something many had forgotten," responded the reporter. "That true faith isn't measured in dollars, and that generosity doesn't need public recognition." Meanwhile, the Church of the Kingdom of Eternal Prosperity faced a massive crisis. The video of the incident had caused an exodus. Thousands of members began abandoning the congregation. Donations decreased by more than 60% in 2 weeks. Media investigated the church's finances, discovering fiscal irregularities, undeclared properties of the pastor, and a pattern of financial manipulation that had lasted years. Pastor Maximilian Ferrer tried to do damage control. He published an apology video on YouTube. "If I offended Brother Fernando, I apologize. My words were misinterpreted. I've always valued every offering, regardless of its amount or presentation." But people didn't believe him. Comments on the video were brutal. "Too late for fake apologies. You're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry you got recorded. Return all the money you've stolen from sincere people." Public pressure was unsustainable. Tax authorities began formal investigations. It was discovered the pastor had been diverting more than 70% of offerings and tithes to personal offshore accounts. He had properties worth $20 million in his name, luxury vehicles, investments in private companies, all financed with money that people of faith had given, believing it was for God's work. 3 months after the incident, Maximilian Ferrer was arrested for fraud, tax evasion, and illicit enrichment. His wife also faced charges. All his assets were frozen. The church closed its doors. The giant building stood empty, a monument to greed disguised as religion. Fernando observed all this with a mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness because so many people had been deceived for so long. Relief because finally the truth had come to light. 1 year after the incident, Fernando received a letter. It was from Pastor Maximilian, written from prison. "Fernando, I don't expect you to forgive me. What I did to you was unforgivable. I humiliated you at the moment when you were most vulnerable. I rejected your offering, which I now understand was one of the purest and most sacred offerings anyone could give. I've had a lot of time to reflect here, to see what I had become. A monster disguised as a pastor. A thief hidden behind biblical verses. Your offering represented years of sacrifice, of paternal love, of genuine faith, and I threw it on the floor as if it were trash. Because in my arrogance, I had completely forgotten what true faith was about. I'm not asking for forgiveness, I don't deserve it. I just want you to know that your public humiliation became my private salvation. Because seeing how the world reacted to your story, seeing how ordinary people demonstrated more Christian love than I did in my entire life, I finally opened my eyes. I'll spend many years in prison. I deserve it. But perhaps, when I get out, I can dedicate the rest of my life to making amends for even a fraction of the damage I caused. May God bless your daughter Lucia, and may He bless you, the man who taught me what it really means to be a Christian. Maximilian." Fernando read the letter twice. Then he folded it carefully and put it away. That night, before sleeping, he prayed for Maximilian, not for the arrogant pastor who had humiliated him, but for the broken man who was in prison, facing the consequences of his actions. "God," Fernando prayed, "help him find true redemption. Help him become the man he pretended to be." Because Fernando had learned something profound through this entire experience, that forgiveness isn't something you give because someone deserves it. It's something you give because you need to free yourself from the weight of resentment. 2 years after the incident, Fernando and Lucia were at a small park near their home. Lucia ran and played, completely healthy, full of energy. The medications had worked. Medical follow-ups were excellent. Her heart was strong. Fernando watched his daughter with tears of gratitude in his eyes, and he remembered that terrible Sunday at church. He remembered the humiliation. He remembered the $6,000 thrown on the floor. But now he saw the complete story. He saw how his pain had become a blessing for thousands of people who had also been victims of spiritual abuse. He saw how his humiliation had exposed a corrupt system. He saw how God had taken the worst thing that had happened to him and transformed it into something beautiful. The $6,000 the pastor had rejected were eventually donated by Fernando to a local orphanage. But before doing so, he wrote a note he attached to the envelope. This money was once rejected by someone who measured its value by its presentation. but now I give it to those who need it, no matter what the envelope looks like. Because I've learned that true value isn't in external appearance, but in the love with which it's given. The orphanage director cried upon receiving the donation and reading the note, and he shared the story with the orphanage children, teaching them an invaluable lesson about generosity, humility, and the true meaning of faith. Leave me in the comments what lesson you took from this story. Have you been judged by your appearance? Have you seen religious leaders who value money more than people? And if you made it to the end, write "value is in the heart" in the comments. Because this story teaches us something fundamental, that God doesn't measure offerings by their presentation, but by the sacrifice and love with which they're given. That the wrinkled bills of a father who worked 5 years to save his daughter are worth infinitely more than millionaire checks given out of ego or public recognition. And that in the end, true wealth isn't found in luxurious buildings or expensive watches, but in love, sacrifice, and the integrity of the human heart. May God bless you. And remember, never let anyone make you feel your offering is shameful if you give it with a sincere heart. Because in God's eyes, the smallest offering given with love is worth more than entire treasures given with pride.